Powerful nations throughout history, from the Roman Empire to the British Empire, they all have one thing in common. They collapsed. And what's really fascinating, and honestly a little terrifying, is that they often fall in remarkably similar ways. It's like they're all following a predictable pattern. So the big question is America following that same script right now?
And just look at how fast this stuff can happen. I mean, in France, a monarchy that had been around for 800 years was just gone in 5. In Russia, the Tsarist regime ruling over 180 million people just crumbled in 8 months. And in Cuba, what was a pretty prosperous nation got flipped into a communist dictatorship in only 2 years. It just goes to show you, systems that seem totally stable can unravel with shocking speed.
And this gets us to the central idea from our sources. There really does seem to be a script, a repeatable pattern for how these huge collapses happen. In fact, it's been broken down into 6 distinct stages, a cycle that is just played out again and again and again throughout history.
Okay, so this is basically a roadmap. We're going to walk through these 6 stages, starting with the very first cracks in a society, all the way to the final collapse. And we're going to use this exact framework to see where the United States might be today, according to the patterns laid out in our sources.
All right, stage 1. It all starts with a widening chasm, a huge gap between the ultra-rich and literally everybody else. And we're not just talking about some people having more money. This is when the gap becomes a full-blown crisis, threatening the entire social contract.
To really get the scale of this, sources point out that today, the top 1% in America control about 32% of the nation's wealth. Now, to put that into perspective, that is a higher concentration of wealth than the French nobility had right before their heads started rolling in the Revolution in 1789.
And the picture gets even crazier when you zoom in. The top 0.1% of American households, that's only about 130,000 families, they now own more wealth than the entire bottom 90% of the country combined. Think about that. One tiny group versus around 117 million households.
And you got to understand, this didn't just happen by accident. According to a major study cited in our sources, this is the result of decades of policy that effectively siphoned an estimated $50 trillion from the bottom 90% of earners to the top 1%.
So, this massive inequality, it doesn't just sit there. It's like a poison that fuels the next stages of the cycle. You get a government that people see as corrupt and incompetent, a middle class that gets completely hollowed out and radicalized, and then, eventually, a population that loses all faith in the system itself. And you can see these symptoms of a system under strain everywhere. A manufacturing base that used to be the envy of the world is basically gone. Real wages for a lot of people haven't moved since 1979, and the national debt is just astronomical. So when people see this, is it any wonder that trust in institutions like Congress just plummets? The American dream feels impossible when a house costs 500% more, but your paycheck is the same.
Our source material brings up this quote from JFK, and it really marks a critical turning point. This is the moment people stop believing the system can be fixed from the inside. When peaceful change feels impossible, history shows us that people start looking for, well, other options.
And here's the kicker. According to this historical pattern, the U.S. isn't just showing some early warning signs. The sources argue it has already passed deep into stage 4. That means a majority of the population no longer trusts its core institutions, the government, the courts, even the media. Historically, that is a huge, huge red flag. Now, all this internal decay, it doesn't happen in a bubble. While America's been wrestling with all these problems, a challenger on the world stage has been playing a very different and very long-term game.
I mean, this shift in global power is just staggering. China is now, without a doubt, the world's factory. They account for an incredible 35% of global manufacturing. That's more than the next 9 biggest countries combined. Meanwhile, America's industrial base, the thing that wants to find its strength, has been completely overshadowed.
The sources point to this really fundamental difference in strategy. You could say that while America has been focused on borrowing money to consume things and acting as the world's police, China has been focused on saving money to invest for the long term. They've positioned themselves as the world's builder, pouring trillions into huge infrastructure projects all over the globe.
So all of this brings us right back to the final and frankly unsettling part of the pattern. If the U.S. really is in stage 4, what does history tell us comes next? What happens after the faith in the system is completely gone?
We're here at stage 4,
But what history shows is that the jump to stages 5 and 6 can happen incredibly fast. This is the part where extremist movements, the ones promising to just tear the whole system down, suddenly gain mass support, and the old order finally collapses under its own weight.
And this really reveals the great tragic irony of revolutions. They are almost never the liberation that people hope for. In France, it led to the terror. In Russia, it led to a brutal civil war that killed 10 million people. In Cuba, a 60-year dictatorship. The chaos that follows the collapse is so often far, far worse than the corruption it replaced.
At the end of the day, the sources argue that this historical pattern doesn't really care about national pride or claims of being exceptional. It's played out in ancient Rome, Imperial Britain, and modern France. So the final question they leave us with isn't really if the pattern applies to America, it's what do those final, chaotic chapters of the story actually look like?